My name's Angelica Yudasto. I'm an artist based in Brooklyn, New York. I work with installation-based bodies of work, dealing with memory and tracing of things that behave in a more malleable temporal manner. I use things like digitally printed silk and borosilicate glass to convey some of those concepts. I am also Peruvian Indonesian, and I feel like a lot of that experience growing up has really lent itself with the way I behave and how adaptable some of my works are. I feel like as an immigrant moving into Miami in 2003, there's a lot. As rigid as this looks, it started off as just a solid piece of rod that you end up manipulating and doing this thing just because it reached heat, essentially. And I thought that was also interesting too, and how that mirrors and reflects onto each other. A lot of these works are also, digital collages of past works, and it's, lived and relived itself, if that makes sense. It's a little bit cannibalistic in a way where I'm using this, digesting it, putting it back out and seeing how that works in this iteration or the next. A lot of this was from my solo at Keysmith Gallery, rubbings of Vaporwave, especially this piece. If you look closely, that's snapshot of sand the one time that I was at the beach, in Brooklyn. And, there's something with sand too, it's something that conforms to whatever touches it. It changes with the waves, it changes with the footprints. And so I've really been intentional about what imagery I put on. There's little hints of skylines, things that also change depending on what you do with them. Some of the mark making here, these are all digitally made, but I also like that on top of it being on silk, this would translate differently if it was on matte paper. My relationship to mark making isn't tied down to whatever tool I'm using. I'm having a painter's brain whenever I'm working with this material. A lot of these marks that I work on Photoshop would be the same as if I would be working on the wall or my sketchbook or on Mylar. But that being said, when I transition into things like glass, it requires a completely different process. It's a rod. I'm under the flame. I feel like glass is also interesting because depending on what mood I'm in, it's gonna reflect in the piece. Like if I'm there nervous, it's gonna start cracking, or it's not. You have to really be at a certain state of mind. And there's this whole technique too, and maybe my approach to it is so intuitive, and like the way a painter does, or at least my style of painting. And it's always funny whenever I pick something that's more technically based, and then it ends up feeling like painting anyway. Yeah. When I start overthinking where things are placed or being overly strategic, that's never been my practice, and I've always sourced my material and then later found new ways of placing things in the installation. So with these being more installation based, I did feel that it was important that they were larger. Not to say that I don't have more medium scale or smaller works, but that requires a different viewership. And with things that are smaller or more, like my glass, they start to say something different. But yeah, I do think about what that looks like. And I'm also, you mentioned different spaces. I like the idea of challenging just the standard, eye level stuff. I want things to feel loose. I want the idea of the fabric to just be present as well. I want to let it be fabric. The wrinkles, I want to be able to play and push with more with video mapping and light, because that definitely changes and it starts looking like water onto the walls. And so, you know, wrinkles are always interesting because you want to be able to make sure that it's intentional too. And so you know, this is a different fabric. This is organza versus that one. So these wrinkles behave differently. Perhaps I'm more convinced by these wrinkles than that one. Some of the recycled imagery and, you know, mirroring really speaks to why, you know, you see some of the glassworks in it. I'm glad you noticed it too. It's always fun whenever I have that next to the glass that it was being represented to, and how that looks differently. But yeah, I'm interested in how, for whatever reason, they still speak to each other seamlessly, even though they're two completely different materials. And I'm always, you know, I'm careful about how I translate things that are being printed, even though it's the same object, because a lot of the times you lose some of those elements. And so I wanted to make sure that I take perhaps like some of the reflection stuff that I can't necessarily do by hand, and then, you know, superimposing those things. But I mean, nothing that we remember is ever concrete. It's hard for me to separate myself as the subject, or, you know, whatever. I can't be my own muse, or maybe I can, you know, when I'm sourcing these memories, but it's always going to be the same. Do you know what I mean? And it's like, especially if that's what I'm referencing, then it takes a lot of me just sitting and staring at the works and seeing what sort of signifiers or, you know, imagery would relate to whatever it is that I was talking about. Like, this mark may feel more anxious than the next mark, you know. So it's just, and a lot of times it is, you know, latent, or, you know, I won't notice something until after the fact, or maybe even years later. Yeah. Like I noticed my old paintings from where I wore a back brace. I had scoliosis, so I wore a back brace for 5 years. Those paintings were very rigid, you know, and I was like in a different moment in my life where I was maybe, you know, of course, more body conscious and insecure. So like, you know, preteen age and stuff like that. And I saw that, you know, once I took the back brace off, a lot of my works became more fluid, and I didn't notice that until later.